Story 1. Walked down a side alley at 3 a.m. in a Scottish city for a bathroom break after clubbing. Noticed I was stepping on glass needles. Looked up and saw 5 sets of eyes watching me from further back in the dark. "Sorry, lads," I said and backed away. Found a nice bush instead. Story 2. I do hardwood floors. We hired a guy who quickly left to work independently, and he asked me, "Hey, are you ever interested in small side jobs?" Typically, I'm not. I make enough money, and I'd rather have the free time. But I said, sure, if it's small, I can help you out. So he calls me one day and says, "Hey, I got this really quick leveling job. It'll take you like 45 minutes. I said, okay. He goes, "Okay, you should go by and check it out after work, because I'm not sure how much it'll take to fix." Nope, you're giving me time estimates when you haven't even been there, and I have to figure that out unpaid? You're on your own. Story 3. My supervisor invited me to a barbecue at her house. I was 18 and new to the job. She said I would get to know people from work, so I ended up going to her house. As I was looking for parking, I noticed nobody was in the backyard. I called her because I thought I might have the wrong address. I parked my car and knocked on the door. I was the only one there, and I knew her husband was out of town. I went back home and was fired a month later. Story 4. When I was 6 years old, a random man at the school gates approached me. He said my father had had an accident and that he sent him to pick me up. I thought no and ran into the school. 10 minutes later, the driver who normally picked me up came to get me. When I got home, my dad had no idea about anything like that. My parents were very pleased that I was smart enough to run away. 30 years later, I still think that is probably one of the most important decisions I ever made. Story 5. There is an underground cave system near where I used to live in the United Kingdom. It is where the royal family and others would have been taken in the event of a large-scale war. Rumor has it there are a bunch of missiles and other equipment stored down there. In the same area, there is a set of stone quarry caves, though they are very old and disused. We are talking about 100 to 200 meters down. You can get to the bunker system from the old caves, apparently. Anyway, at around 17 years old, a group of my friends found a way in, so we went down and explored a little. There are literally miles of caves down there. We did not get lost, but my friends did not explore much and left. About a week later, I wanted to go down again, but none of the others wanted to join me. I went down alone with a couple of battery-operated torches, chalk, and other supplies. I was down there about 45 minutes, happily looking around and mentally mapping the place in the pitch black when I started to hear a shuffling noise, like when an elderly person shuffles around their house in slippers. I thought, this is military guys coming to tell me to leave or escort me out. So I turned my torch off, crouched down, and did not move a muscle. I still heard the shuffling, though it sounded more like actual walking now, but it kept stopping and starting, as if someone was listening out for me. It was only then I realized, in the absolute darkness, that I did not see any torches or lights. Someone or something was down there trying to find me, and they did not need a torch. That was probably the closest I have ever been in my life to being terrified. I stood up quickly and turned on my heel to go back. I must have made a noise because I heard those steps, and they were faster now. Well, my friends, I ran faster than I ever have before back to the entrance, up the slope, and dove out of the small hole I had crawled in through earlier, all the while hearing my own footsteps followed by another set. I got out, did not stop running, jumped into my car, and drove away. I never saw anything, but I did not need to. I never went back. Story 6. A girlfriend I had in high school wanted me to get her pregnant. She said I would not need to be involved in any way. No, I ended that relationship very quickly. Story 7. The restaurant owner said he could not afford to pay my work check. I am not running a charity. I left immediately. Story 8. I walked into a restaurant, looked around, saw how packed the place was and how frustrated the waitress looked. So I just turned around and walked back out. The hostess came out of the door, yelling at me to come back and not waste her time. When I didn't come back, she started yelling at me to never come back. It was kind of funny, but I was really glad I didn't eat there. I never went back, and the restaurant closed several months later. Story 9. I worked in a restaurant in New Zealand. I did a split shift and was told to arrive 30 minutes before work for each shift. We were not paid for those 30 minutes, so that was 1 hour unpaid. The next morning, the head chef came running in a minute past 9 a.m. He asked if the owner was here, and I said no. 30 minutes later, he said it was time to log into the system. I walked out, which I should have done the day before. The worry in his eyes about coming late to the unpaid 30 minutes was intense. There was no meeting, and you were expected to be in full uniform and ready to start work 30 minutes early. Then take a minute to log in and finally return to your workstation. Story 10. I was in Yellowstone and turned onto a path to find a group of tourists standing way too close to a baby bison, taking pictures. I didn't want to be there when the mother came for her calf, so I quickly went back the other way. Story 11. I worked in a bar, and just as we were about to close, an odd man walked in and asked if he could use the bathroom. We let him, and after roughly 15 minutes, we realized that he had not come out yet. Just as I wanted to check, he went straight to the exit, walking in a bit of an odd way. It started to smell. We then realized that he left a trail of feces across the bar while leaving, and when I checked the bathroom, it was everywhere. Walls, toilets, urinals, and even in the sink. He probably smeared it with his hands and threw some on the ceiling. How can someone defecate so much? And why would you do that? It just does not make sense. Story 12. Working as a server, I walked up to the host stand at the same moment 3 men entered with their hoods up, strings pulled to cover their faces, and pistols. 2 of the men grabbed some of the hostesses and servers, while the other pointed his gun at the manager, who I was standing next to, and told him to take him to the safe. I quickly left by turning sharply into our bar area and warned other servers about the situation. They promptly sprinted out the back exit. Moments later, the off-duty police officer sitting at our bar had a brief shootout with the robbers and chased them away. Story 13. I was at a public park with no restroom facilities, only a portable toilet. I opened the door and saw a mound of tissue sticking up above the rim of the toilet. The inside was splattered and tinged with brown, and it reeked intensely. I slammed the door quickly and then used hand sanitizer. Story 14. I was really intoxicated at a party once, and one of the guys I went with, not really a close friend but someone I knew, came over, passed me a cup of water and said, "Sip it quickly," then disappeared. I awkwardly took a small sip, confused, and looked to my friend on the right, who was experiencing the effects of lysergic acid diethylamide and 3,4-methylenedioxymethamphetamine with the biggest grin on his face. I put the cup down and went elsewhere. I have no idea what was in the cup, but I did not want it. Story 15. I was at a party with my very mentally ill sibling. She is doing well now, but at the time, she was severely depressed and using a lot of alcohol and marijuana. The host of the party offered to get cocaine for people. I knew my sibling would partake, and that cocaine would not help her current mental state. I carried and dragged her out of there 20 seconds after that. Story 16. Woke up and noticed the girl I had just started dating was staring straight into my soul. Her eyes were open, but she appeared to be fast asleep. She was a redhead. Story 17. Tourist in Thailand, about to shortcut through an alley. A man on my side pulled out his phone as I was walking up. I could see 2 men start moving on the other end. Most likely a coincidence, but I like my kidneys too much to take that risk. Story 18. So, I was a 12-year-old out hunting with my dad. I was carrying his 6mm hunting rifle, which I now know has a hair trigger. I had taken a hunter's safety course. I knew the rules for safe firearm handling, and I was smart enough not to do this. But I was hiking with my finger on the trigger because the metal trigger guard had a fun texture and I liked touching it. Then I stepped on a rock wrong, and the gun went off. I stopped. My dad stopped. We both looked at each other, and he said, "I felt that bullet go past my leg." I looked down and saw a small scuff on his pants where the bullet shaved off the tiniest amount of fabric. We both just turned around and started walking back to the truck. He made it clear he wasn't mad. He knew it was an accident. He also said he had literally scared himself a little and wanted to go back to camp for dry pants. I have never put my finger on a trigger again until I am fully ready to shoot and there are no people near the barrel. Story 19. In Iraq, our squad leader told a teammate and me to check out the courtyard behind a mud brick house where weapons caches, explosives, and similar items might be found. We turned the corner and came face to face with a man who appeared to be aggressively handling what I assumed was his favorite goat. I looked at my teammate, and without saying anything, we both turned around and walked away. He could have had a nuclear-tipped ballistic missile in there, but we were not going to search. Story 20. I was hired for Burger King, and they immediately put me on the night shift. This Burger King was particularly notorious for having a bad reputation because it was next to clubs and pubs close to the beach. As soon as they had me working at the front of the house, I said no and looked for the first excuse to be sent home. I never applied for fast food again. Story 21. When I was in my late teens, I was working at an auto parts store. A regular customer came in and, in a growling guttural voice, said he needed to use the bathroom. Our bathroom was about as close to an outhouse as you could get that actually had indoor plumbing. It was in the corner of the store on an elevated platform with paneled walls supported only by 2x4s at the corners. It was open-topped and essentially like going to the bathroom behind a curtain. He went back there, and the sounds were horrible. When I say he wrecked it, he really did. There was feces all over the walls, the toilet, and the floor. My boss laughed after he left, looked at me and another guy and said, "Well, you guys have something to clean up." We both said no and told him to fire us if he wanted to. He had to clean it up. Story 22. That would have to be when I was 6 months pregnant, living on the 5th floor. I pressed the elevator button to head down to the lobby so I could go grocery shopping. The doors opened, and there was a man standing there with his hood up, clearly high on some kind of stimulant, pacing back and forth. He said, "Wait a minute. This floor isn't hell. You coming? Come on in. Come on, hurry." I ran so fast to my apartment to get my husband. He came walking out with me to make sure I could leave the building safely. We got on the elevator. The man was gone at this point, and as the doors opened in the lobby, the man was standing there with his keys clenched in his fist, eyes wide, staring at us like he was ready to stab someone. My husband said, "Get out of here right now," and the man scurried off like a little rat. I truly believe this man was going to attack me if my husband had not come down with me. He looked possessed. Story 23. My roommate in college was upset that his skateboard got stolen at a fraternity party, so he bought a BB gun with the intent of robbing the doorman at the next party there. I told him I wanted no part of it. He and another friend decided to test the BB gun by shooting it out of our dorm window. The problem was our dorm was L-shaped, and one of the resident advisors on the floor above us could see right into our room and saw them shooting it. They left, and 5 minutes later, I got a knock. The police were there and wanted to know where the gun was. Luckily for my roommate and me by default, he took it with him and was able to get rid of it before he came back. No gun, no warrant, no charges. We were watched closely after that. Story 24. I was in a poorly maintained store in a rough area, just looking at the merchandise. The store had multiple rooms in a large commercial building. Loud fans were running overhead, and the lighting was poor. I opened a door, thinking it was a bathroom, but it was a janitorial closet. Standing in the middle of the dark closet was a naked man. I immediately turned and left, my heart racing the entire time. Story 25. I returned to work after being off for several weeks to care for a family member. Only one of the 4 managers showed up. The manager who came to our site that day was nice but inexperienced and had to leave early. The place was a mess, and in general, no one cared anymore. I refused to return, and eventually they stopped calling. Story 26. I ended up in a nightclub after a work Christmas party, and a woman coworker grabbed my hand and pulled me in for a dance. Her boyfriend at the time also worked with us, and he was unpredictable. Royal moat haircut, shredded physique, thick inner-city accent. He had served time in prison for beating up a policeman with a friend while drunk and high. He had told me the story a couple of times, and it seemed to bring him merriment. He loved it. When we got to the nightclub, he started buying me and another young man shot after shot of Sambuca. He was telling us how jealous he was of his girlfriend and how he would attack any man who tried to make a move on her. The music was very loud, so he mimed much of the violence he would inflict. The lighting and strobes of the club really emphasized his point. When she grabbed my hand, I almost yanked her over with the intensity. I pulled my hand back. Story 27. My husband went away for work, like he does every 2 months, so I went out to a bar alone, which I hardly ever do, just to get out. A man came up and started chatting randomly with me. He asked if he could buy me a drink, and I said sure, but I kind of flagged myself as stupid right there. Then this man went on about how he recognizes me from my son's school and that his child goes there too. The school and our area are very small, and everyone knows everyone's business, but I had never seen this man before. I told him I had never seen him there. He said it's because he's new in the area. I was confused. I started feeling a bit sluggish but chalked it up to being tired. This man then asked if he could give me a ride home later, saying I looked tired and that he knows my husband is away for work and won't be back until a certain date. He said he doesn't think I should be alone, especially since we don't lock our doors in our gated community. My brain took a long time to process, and when it did, he gave me the creepiest smile ever. I said I had to go to the restroom and would be right back so we could leave. I then managed to run and stumble quickly to get to the manager's office in the back. Needless to say, I don't go out alone anymore. I am more vigilant when driving, dropping off my child, getting home, and so on. That man gave me the fright of my life because I wasn't vigilant enough. Now I have perpetual anxiety. Story 28. On foot at night in San Francisco about 10 years ago, I turned onto a street and saw many people tweaking, absolutely out of their faces. They were on the sidewalks, in doorways, in gutters. Several were propped up against walls and light poles, still on their feet but not conscious. Sounds of moaning came from all directions. It was like an apocalypse movie. I quickly turned back the way I came and saw a police car. I told them what I saw, truly thinking it was a sudden random event and that everyone needed medical attention. They told me that street is always like that and to stay away if I do not want to be harmed. My heart broke seeing so many people in that condition, basically cast out of society with no way back. Story 29. I was cycling in the evening in the dark on a poorly lit and remote bike path. In the distance, I saw a few men walking. As I got closer, 5 of them started walking side by side, blocking the path completely. I immediately turned around and took a long detour to get home. Story 30. In a job interview for a startup company, I found out the position was for anything IT related: servers, machine deployment, image building, security software, and systems, everything. I was grossly underqualified, but they made an offer and asked what I was willing to take pay-wise. I joked, "With all you're having me do, I wouldn't take any less than $300,000 a year." The recruiter said, "Yeah, we can make that work." I realized they were writing checks they couldn't cash and declined the offer. Story 31. I was staying in a cabin in the woods when there was a huge noise like a roar or an explosion. I did not open the door to see what it was. A bear, a mountain lion, aliens, whatever it was. I ignored it and went back to sleep. Story 32. I was at a music festival and saw a couple having sex. He was standing, and she was lying on her back in the bed of a pickup truck. Story 33. I work maintenance in a park, and I stopped in a restroom to use the toilet. I walked in and was hit with a strong, unpleasant smell. Someone had defecated right inside the door. I turned around as soon as I saw it. It was not my area to take care of, and the person in charge of that restroom does not help anyone else. Story 34. I went to get some items at IKEA on a Sunday. I walked in, looked around at the crowds by the registers, and realized that since my schedule also gave me some weekdays off, I did not have to be there. I turned around and walked out to return in a couple of days. Story 35. Working as a bouncer. A big biker man who looked like a legitimate threat as a Viking shouted, "Who wants to fight me?" Usually, I would stroll over, tell him politely to be quiet, and escort him out because he was too drunk. One of the younger bouncers decided to challenge him and was thrown about 15 feet into a table. That's when the big man stepped up and went after him. He was nearly the same size but less muscular and had plenty of experience. About 6'6", 400 pounds. The Viking easily picked him up and slammed him, knocking him out cold. I didn't hesitate to not intervene. I'm experienced, but this was like fighting Thor himself. I approached the man's group and said kindly, "Hey, I don't want to call the police, and I appreciate your business tonight, but can you please control your friend?" The man's brother said, "Not tonight." They escorted him out the front door, and a friend drove him home. The biker men respected me after that and always kept the others calm. Story 36. When I was 15, I was stranded on a dark road at 2 a.m. with no phone. Suddenly, a car with two women in their 40s pulled up, and I immediately knew they were drunk. They invited me inside and said they would take me home. They were way too giggly. I ran as fast as I could in the opposite direction. Story 37. I was a camp counselor when I was around 18 years old. I walked in on two of my campers about 12 years old, engaging in clearly sexual behavior while wearing almost nothing. I briefly made eye contact with one of them, then shut the door and walked away, trying to forget what I saw. Not a word was ever said. Reporting it would have caused a long series of headaches and embarrassment for them. I chose not to report it to keep things easier for everyone. Story 38. Oh damn, I've got a good one for this. Back in high school, I was pretty active in my church youth group. Twice a year, we would go on retreats to two different, basically summer camp type places, one in the spring and one in the fall, only for one weekend each time. The place we went for the fall retreat had a fairly long and scenic trail through the woods. My buddy and I liked to walk this trail at least once every time we went. One year, we had some free time before heading to the cabins for bed. So we decided to walk the trail even though it was after dark. That was a mistake that set off a wild series of events. We were maybe halfway along the trail, about a quarter of a mile in. I was looking down while we walked so I wouldn't trip on anything because I'm very clumsy. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my friend stop. I looked back at him and asked what was wrong. He was staring off into the distance in front of us when suddenly he screamed, "Run!" and took off at light speed back the way we came. For a split second, my brain was confused, until I looked ahead and saw the shadow of a big man on the trail about 100 feet away. I should pause and explain why this was so horrifying. Our group leader had scheduled this particular weekend because the owners of the retreat center had assured her that we would be alone. The place was divided in half so two different groups could theoretically stay there at the same time, but she did not want that since we were just a bunch of kids. Back in the woods, this is why we were even more freaked out than usual. We were supposed to be alone out there. There was not supposed to be anyone else but our group. So when I saw that shadow, I took off after my friend. I have never run so fast in my life. After 15 to 20 seconds of sprinting, my friend looked over his shoulder and then stopped running. I stopped too, and when I looked back, there was no one behind us. We took a minute to rest, and as we caught our breath, my friend told me he had gotten out of there so fast because he saw a long gun, either a rifle or shotgun, in the man's hand. I had not noticed that. We jogged back to the camp to tell our group leader that there was a man with a gun in the woods. Naturally, she was unsettled and had the counselors lead everyone back to the cabins, where they stood guard all night. Our leader called the people running the place first thing in the morning, and when I saw her a couple of hours later, she was furious. Apparently, when she called the office to report our sighting, the staff said it was probably just one of the hunters from the hunting club that was using the other half of the place. These people told her there would be no one there, but then allowed a group of armed hunters who were actively hunting in the woods to rent out a place with over 100 kids in it. We had heard noises too, but assuming we were alone, we didn't think much of it at the time. I'm genuinely surprised that none of us were harmed that weekend. She actually threatened to sue the place and said she would never take the group there again. That was my senior year of high school, so I didn't return to that youth group after that. I'm not sure if they ever went back or not. Scary stuff. Story 39. I saw a man stealing tires from parked cars and tossing them into the bed of his pickup truck on a side street when I lived in a large city. He left the cars stacked on bricks where the tires had been. I was leaving for work at 4 a.m. in the middle of winter to get to the bus stop and would have had to walk past him to get there. He stopped, looked straight at me, and did not say or do anything. There was no one else around. I immediately walked back into my apartment and ordered a rideshare. Story 40. A friend and I drove about 15 miles to a small town to pick up some methamphetamine back when we used. When we arrived, we went into a man's trailer where his roommate looked pale and cyanotic, waving a gun around, delirious. I have done some bad things in my life and have been to places so bad that only cockroaches would stay there. I left immediately and tried to get my friend to come back so we could leave since he was driving, but he was determined to get his drugs. I ended up walking home, which took about 5 hours, and he still had not left by that time. Story 41. Got a job offer to work at a retail vapor shop. I open and close for 11 hours, 5 days a week, and maintain the store. These are mandatory hours. It is also a contractor position, and you only make 10% commission after tax. No, thank you for your consideration. Story 42. September 11th. Watched the first tower collapse. Was just about to head back downtown to try to help as a volunteer, to assist the wounded. Had to turn around and head north. There was nothing anyone could do that day. Nobody to help. People either escaped unscathed or died. The wounded are the cancer and lung cases 20 years later. Story 43. In high school, I looked over at a group of girls talking when the wind blew, and one of them had her dress lift just enough to show more than intended. Quickly turned my head and walked away. Story 44. My friends and I were attempting to explore an abandoned mental hospital, lad school in Rhode Island, at night. There were security cars patrolling, so we had to be careful. We ended up in a small alley, hiding while a guard's car drove by. We weren't paying much attention to our surroundings and realized we were trampling on a homeless man's tarp tent. We heard a grunt from inside. We quickly left. Scared us a lot. My friend and I wanted to go back, but the other two did not. To make things worse, one of my friends lost his car keys when we ran away, so we spent about an hour searching on our hands and knees for his keys. Story 45. When I saw a family in Yellowstone encouraging their children under 10 years old to walk toward bison so they could get a picture, I could not stand to watch. Story 46. As a tourist in Istanbul, shopping for shoes at the Grand Bazaar, a man wanted to show me the shoes at his store. I followed him down a few stores and then into a gallery of stores, all the way to the last store at the back. By then, I was ready to run, which I did as soon as I saw his companion opening a cellar door and both telling me that was where all the pretty shoes were. Story 47. My wife and I were at a friend's Halloween party when I walked into the living room and saw 3 stoned women blowing handfuls of glitter into the air and dancing in it. I grabbed my wife in the kitchen and said, "We have to go now." She could tell it was serious, so we were outside in about 10 seconds. When I explained to my wife about the glitter, she just said, "Oh my God." I texted my friend from the car that he had a contamination event. He has moved twice since then and still complains about finding random flecks of glitter. Story 48. I was driving towards Alabama one night when I got off the interstate onto an unpaved country road leading up a mountain. In the distance, I saw a man standing in the middle of the road with something in one hand. He was waving his free arm. As I got closer, I realized it was a machete, and I think he was trying to flag us down. The man had to have been at least 6 feet 5 inches tall, with long hair and a flannel shirt. I hit the brakes immediately. I turned around and went home. I have seen too many horror movies and knew what was about to happen. Now, Story 49. While visiting Cades Cove in Tennessee, my then 10-year-old wanted to walk down to the creek at the bottom of a gently sloping, wide-open hill and field. We got about 2/3 of the way down when the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I felt like we were being watched, but there was no one else for hundreds of yards in any direction. I stood there for a moment before turning around and walking back to the car. When we got back, my wife informed us that someone had reported seeing a mother black bear with 2 young cubs walking down the creek. My instinct was dead on that day. Story 50. A man asked 9-year-old me and my cousin to help him move some furniture while we were on our way to school. My cousin, God bless her naive soul, wanted to go for it. I would have too. He was really convincing. That smirk of his, though, was very subtle but definitely there. I grabbed her and ran. The difference between trusting your gut feeling and ignoring it was right there. Story 51. A random Burger King next to the motel at midnight, somewhere in Bakersfield, California. Junkies in the bathrooms. A sketchy motel with a door that could not lock. No staff to be seen except for one person who also did not seem sober. It was such a surreal vibe. I wish I could post a picture because it looked just like a movie. I have watched too many horror movies for it not to raise suspicion. As a Dutch person, it seems so majestic to learn what people are talking about when they mention California and to feel the eerie vibe that is so well portrayed in movies, series, and stories. I left immediately. Story 52. Became semi-serious with my ex-girlfriend and traveled halfway around the world to meet her family. The moment I saw them, they started calling me their son-in-law. Not even the worst part. The next morning, they held a surprise ceremony for us, which made us semi-engaged. I respectfully declined and quietly left. We broke up after 1 week. Story 53. First date. We go to her place. We enter the bedroom, and I see a sex dungeon. It looks dirty and smells strange. She asks me, "Do you know what shibari means?" I say, "No, and I don't want to know." I got out of there. Story 54. I went on a Bumble date with a man who said he was homeless. I was hesitant, but he promised it was not weird and that he would explain in person. He had a professional job and looked attractive. We met at a bar, and he told me his siblings were out to get him and had him committed to inpatient care for no reason. I was foolish and stayed a bit longer. I remember he told me about a situation with a woman he dated, and alarm bells went off in my head. Get out! I had told him I would drive him to the next town to his friend's house beforehand. I ended up dropping him off a few blocks away and told him to leave. I blocked him and never spoke to him again. Story 55. I was 25, hitting it off with a super cute girl at a 4th of July party. I overheard her talking about how cool I am. There was no touching or anything like that, but I stopped and asked, "Wait, how old are you?" She said 17. I backed out of the crowd in front of the band, like Homer Simpson, into the bushes. Story 56. I was approached by a creepy woman with severe dental decay in a park on a sunny afternoon. She asked me if I was interested in making public videos for a subscription-based content platform. I declined firmly. I believe it might have been a setup for a robbery. There is no way that woman was going to make money on that site. The interesting part is that this happened in a quiet suburb. I have never been approached like that in a city. You would expect the opposite. I was really surprised to encounter that. Story 57. I have a certain family member who becomes very argumentative and somewhat malicious when they get drunk. I went over to their house one day per invite, and they greeted me completely drunk at the door. I just told them I forgot something in the car, went to the car, and drove away without saying a word. Story 58. I was in 4th grade, and there was a boy who went to the high school across the street from my school. His sister was in my grade, so I saw him fairly often. He would always say strange things about my body and make me feel very uncomfortable. One day, when I was walking home, I turned the corner and saw him waiting for me at the entrance of an alley I had to pass to get home. I said no and immediately turned around, going back to the school. The principal then drove me home after I explained what had been happening. Story 59. I was left a huge gun collection from my grandfather and went to sell it all at a gun show for the family. It is America. I just took pictures of their identification and wrote down the serial numbers. A man runs up without even looking at anything. He asks, "Do you do background checks?" I replied, "We do now." Story 60. Listening to Christians telling me I need to repent after hearing them be racist, criticize the poor, or sit in judgment over me or anyone else is difficult. Story 61. When I was in an armored cavalry unit, I was a tank commander. The air cavalry pilots bragged about how big a branch they were able to snatch off treetops with the landing skids. When offered a helicopter ride, and guessing they would show off and try to scare us, I took over washing dishes in the kitchen so that soldier could go. I do not get in aircraft with crazies. Story 62. I had broken up with my abuser about a month before the summer of 2020 and was slowly starting to return to him. I felt like I was in the emotional trenches. It is confusing to love someone who is your biggest bully. He wanted to celebrate my birthday with me, and I sat on his Walmart futon listening to him rant about Donald Trump, anti-fascist activists, and the Black Lives Matter movement. It washed over me, the violently undeniable disgust. I never missed him after that moment. I have never looked back at the racist I left behind. Story 63. Walk into my office and see my boss angrily yelling at his computer during a Microsoft Teams meeting with international clients. I proceed to walk out and decide to work from home for the rest of the week, giving the excuse that my car was broken into. Story 64. I hit my head on the wall. I walked off immediately because there was no way I would allow that to happen a second time. Story 65. Walking through a wooded area with my partner, we noticed everything suddenly got quiet, except for the sound of something very large moving through the foliage toward us. We left quickly, and to this day I still do not know what it was, but our instincts told us to get out. Story 66. He said, "I hope you do not mind. My mother lives with me." Then I heard, "Hi, sweetie. Do you want snacks?" from under the bed. Nope. Story 67. My boyfriend at the time started using drugs. I was completely against them. I said, "Me or drugs?" He said, "I can't just give them up that quickly." I decided to leave. Story 68. I went back to my alcoholic, cocaine addict, cheating ex-husband after a year-long separation during which I met the love of my life. I talked to my ex one day on the phone before I ended things with my boyfriend. My ex-husband said he had gotten a great job and was sober for the first time in years. This should have been the moment when I said no and hung up instantly. I knew deep in my gut I was about to get roped back in, but I let my emotions and my guilt over my child sweep me away. It was like tectonic plates inside me had shifted. My then boyfriend tried to talk me out of it. He said it was guilt, instincts, and attachment talking. He said it was stupid to let my child be raised by an addict. Couldn't hear it. I had to learn the hard way. When you have your no moment, listen. Story 69. A man came into a restaurant I was managing right when we opened and went straight to the bathroom. He was about 7 feet tall and weighed at least 350 pounds. 30 minutes later, he casually walked up to the register and said, "You better have someone come look at your bathroom," then left. I went to check and immediately noticed a large object sticking out of the toilet, extending past the seat as if it were hovering in the air. It was about 2 feet long with a circumference of at least 3 inches. We had to call the plumber. The plumber was shocked and removed the toilet from the floor to clear the blockage. It was the most vile and rancid thing I have ever seen. That man must have experienced significant discomfort. Story 70. In stormy weather, my lieutenant's hair started standing up while we were in formation about to run. I said, "Ma'am, you're about to get struck by lightning." And I quickly left without asking or waiting for a response. Typically, this is not a smart thing to do in the military. I was practically going absent without leave. A few seconds later, I heard the formation breaking up and everyone heading to their cars. Lightning never struck, but it was still frightening. Story 71. The company I worked for hired someone else to do my job who lived on the other side of the country. I was told it was because we needed someone special for a project. That special person was doing exactly what I have been doing for years and have several awards for. The other person was brought on because they are a good friend of the project leader. Despite this, I planned to focus on other projects but first politely and professionally expressed to the project leader that I felt hurt and slighted by their decision. The project leader told me how I should feel and that my feelings were wrong. I quit on the spot. Because of this, the company lost the person scheduled to work on 3 out of 5 projects because they wanted to hire someone special for one project. Story 72. Not the biggest, but just a recent one that comes to mind. I went into Walmart intending to buy a pack or 2 of men's underwear. I was surprised to find them behind locked doors and located the attendant to open the cabinet for me. She barely let me feel the package and did not want to let it out of her hand. I made my selection, but she insisted on taking it to customer service for me. I snapped. I told her to put it right back where it came from, and that I was going shopping on Amazon instead. I can understand locking up something valuable, but men's underwear? Story 73. While I was in the military, anytime I saw a military female excessively drinking around males, it never ended well. Story 74. At work, every year we have a Thanksgiving potluck. The break room is right next to my office. I heard hysterical laughter, so I went to investigate. There was a red velvet cake where the bottom of a carrying container with a handle on the top had become detached from the base that actually held the cake. Red velvet cake was spattered all across the break room floor, almost as if it had been dropped from the ceiling instead of just a few feet. Cake everywhere. Icing everywhere. One of my coworkers was laughing and frantically scooping handfuls of the cake back onto the container while the other was doubled over laughing. When they saw my face, they both started laughing even harder. I just slowly backed away. Story 75. I misread this title as movie instead of moment. I was going to say in the movie Prisoners when he opens the briefcase and there are snakes. I left the room. Story 76. We were high on LSD and decided to visit a supposedly haunted abandoned house. Some man had murdered his family, and there were bloodstains. Down a long vine-covered driveway, it was not just a house but a giant mansion. I said, "No way." Someone said, "Go hard or go home." I said, "No, I'm going home. I'm not going in there." Police were watching us the entire time, ready to arrest anyone who tried to enter. Someone had fallen through a floor days earlier and had to be rescued. Trying to stay calm in front of the police officer while my face felt like it was melting, and actually looking him in the eye while tripping was one of life's great challenges. We talked our way out of it. We were not arrested for breaking and entering or for the drugs we had. Story 77. I was walking home drunk one night from a friend's house at about 12 a.m. I heard a little girl laugh from the bushes, turned right around, and had him drive me home. Story 78. I quit my veterinary assistant job during my lunch break when they blatantly ignored a dog screaming in pain because of a spinal issue. He was boarding there while his owner was out of town. I told the veterinary technicians about the dog, and they said it was a chronic issue that he received prescription medication for. However, I had seen him slip in his kennel, and he screamed so loud that it absolutely broke me. My own dog had passed away just a couple of weeks prior, and I was not going to stay in an environment where they wouldn't even check on the dog right away. The poor baby. Story 79. Applying for the Border Patrol. Polygraph test. They said I was not passing, so they had me start nodding my head slightly to answer. Then they had me start whispering my answers. I walked out of that polygraph test. No way I was staying for that. Story 80. I walked into an airport restroom to find a man taking a shower in the sink, with his soiled pants on the floor and his shirt used as a rag. The smell still haunts me. I waited to use the facilities on the plane. Story 81. Went to use the restroom at a supermarket, picked a stall and had a nice sit. Someone else came in and chose the stall next to mine. He sounded like he was having a tough time. I heard a lot of toilet paper being ripped, and during the process, this person dropped a few leaflets on the floor. He reached down to pick them up, and I saw blood smeared all over his hand. Internally, I was freaking out. Story 82. Friends with benefits said, "Good job," after having sex and then sent me home alone late at night because he was afraid of giving me false hopes, knowing I had feelings for him. I begged him to at least let me stay on the sofa in a different room for the night. I went home because it was his home and he set the boundaries, but I never talked to him again. That was also the moment I fell out of love with him and the last time I talked to him. Story 83. I went on a date with a man who confessed that he did not know me, but he knew who I was because he used to watch me sleep. I asked a couple of clarifying questions, such as what, how, where, what is going on. Then I left immediately. Story 84. I was solo watching The Craft in a local theater. My mom always said that theaters in Azusa are dangerous. I used to spend all day movie hopping. At this showing, it was only me and another large rowdy group. A character in the movie told an offensive racial joke, which upset the other group a lot. One of them marched towards the screen, cursing at it the whole time. I was mostly amused until he pulled out a knife and cut the actual movie screen. I muttered something about getting popcorn and headed home. I saw a movie on the poorly repaired movie screen the following week. Carried that scar for years. Also, what happens at the end of the craft? Can't be better than that memory. Story 85. I think I was 13 when I was sitting on a driveway talking to my neighbor's son about Pirates of the Caribbean and how I loved Orlando Bloom. The guy must have been in his 30s. And he said, "Does he make you excited?" I was shocked. Story 86. I went out for late-night snacks. As I pulled into the convenience store, there was a group of about 20 men eyeing me closely. I thought, no, I don't need chips that badly, so I kept driving and went to McDonald's instead. All was good. The next day, a man outside looked completely disheveled from head to toe. As I walked past, he said, "Hey, I'm all messed up like this because I got attacked by about 20 men at the convenience store last night. My choice to go to McDonald's was a good one." Story 87. I had a job interview for a position in mental health. They asked me about 10 to 15 simple questions, none of which were related to counseling. After a brief interview of about 10 minutes, they left the room to speak with their supervisor. They returned within a minute or two and said they were ready to offer me the position. I told them I would think about it and left, already decided that I was not going to accept. Turns out that a lot of questionable things happen there, and I should have checked reviews before going. Story 88. When a man I was talking to online decided to casually mention necrophilia in the middle of sexy conversation. Story 89. One day, I was walking early in the morning, around 4:50 a.m. As I walked to my apartment, I noticed a man with his dog on the road. The dog was on a chain, not a leash. Because of the time, I could only make out the silhouette of the man, but I noticed him staring at me the whole time. I remember it, and it gives me chills all over my body. Story 90. More than once, I've pulled into a parking lot or gas station late at night, saw the people there, and decided these night visitors were a little too wild for my tastes. Story 91. I walked into my mom's boyfriend talking to his friend. He said, "These illegal immigrants are ruining America." I immediately put my hands up and said, "Nope, not touching that." Then I walked back to my room. Story 92. New friend, hard drugs, reckless driving, rude to their mom and service workers, neglected pets. No thanks. Story 93. Went upstairs to get my son for dinner. He had his bedroom door open and was sitting on the floor with his legs open, self-stimulating. I quietly turned around, went downstairs and put the food away. I was no longer hungry. Later, when he asked about dinner, I told him there were leftovers in the refrigerator and he could heat them up. I couldn't look him in the eye for a couple of days. Boys, close your bedroom doors. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.